If you have a Bible with you, I want you to go ahead and grab it and turn to Luke chapter 15. I'm going to give you this passage of Scripture. I'm not actually going to read it, but I'm going to refer to the story that's in it as we go through the message. So I thought it might be good for you to have availability to that as we get through this. This passage that we're going to look at today is often referred to as the parable of the prodigal son. And this is one of the foundational messages that the Crosswalk was started on. And whether you've been in church or out of church all your life, you've most likely heard some reference to this particular story. This is probably one of the most well-known stories and parables in the Bible. And this morning we're starting a brand new series entitled Grace 2.0. I warned you I was going to do this a few weeks ago, that we were going to get into grace big time, and we're going to be doing that for the next 6 weeks. We're going to be looking at the parables of Jesus. Almost every parable that I'm familiar with creates some kind of outrage in the hearts of people because it shows how clear God's grace really is. And we still have trouble understanding when that word grace gets used. Now, we're going to look at 6 different parables, not all today, so relax. But we're going to look at 6 different parables in this series. Some of them are going to be familiar to you. You're going to go, oh yeah, I know that story. And there's going to be a couple of them that you're not as familiar with. So I think my hope is that we'll learn some new things together. Okay? We're going to learn some new things together, right? Yes, okay. Landon's in the back there cheering me on, so I appreciate that, dude. Yeah. I want to start with a quote from a writer that I like a lot. His name is Robert Capon. And he was defining or describing what a parable is. So let's go ahead and put this up there. He said, the parables set forth comparisons that tend to make mincemeat of people's religious expectations. Bad people in Jesus' parables are rewarded. For example, the publican, the prodigal, the unjust steward. Good people in Jesus' parables are scolded. For example, the Pharisee, the elder brother, the diligent workers. And he says, in general, everybody's idea of who ought to be first or last is liberally doused with cold water. So whatever ideas you bring into this, Jesus is very likely going to turn it upside down on you. And I think that's an incredible description of what goes on in the parables, which is why I love to preach for them. Parables are comparisons that, as he said, tend to make mincemeat out of our religious expectations. Now, the word parable, I'm just going to give you a real quick Greek and Latin lesson. You ready for that today, right? Yeah. It's been so long since we've done any Greek and Latin, right? Okay, so in Latin, the word parable literally means comparison. That's what a parable is. It's a comparison. In the Greek language, it means to place side by side. So you take 2 things, you put them side by side, and you look at what the difference is. So in this parable of the prodigal son, Jesus wants to compare what we think God is like to who God really is. So Jesus places religion and the good news of Jesus Christ side by side, and he shows us that he himself, Jesus, is emphatically not religious. In this parable, he does this by comparing 2 responses to the selfish rebellion son that's in the story of the prodigal son. He compares the religious responses of the older brother to the grace-filled response of the father. And if you know about this story, you know where we're headed with this, okay? Now, most of us, let's talk about prodigals for just a moment. Most of us at some point in our lives have felt a little bit like the prodigal. Most broken people tend to identify in one way or another with a prodigal. And I would say this, almost all human beings have prodigal tendencies. And if the Bible's true, and I believe it is, when it tells us in Romans chapter 3, verse 22 and 23, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, if that's true, and then if Romans chapter 3, verse 10 is true, which says there is no one righteous, not even one, then that means all of us are prodigals. Every single one of us is a prodigal. And I have to confess to you that I've always had a soft place in my heart for prodigals. I've had a soft place in my heart for this kid in particular who runs away to the far country and wastes all of his inheritance. In some ways, this parable that we're going to go through is a summary of Christianity and the good news of Jesus Christ. So we're going to get a real lesson on what Jesus wanted us to know. So again, I'm going to retell this story instead of reading it. I trust that you can and will read it for yourself, right? Yes, Pastor David, I'm going to read this for myself. Yeah. Well, you're probably familiar with the story. As we said, it's found in Luke chapter 15. There's a man who has two sons. His younger son approaches him one day and says, basically, Dad, I'm tired of working for you. I'd like to receive my inheritance now so that I can go and live my own life. Now, we need to understand, I think we do, that back in those days, a child would only get his inheritance from the father once the father was dead. So we're kind of circumventing a little bit of that here, aren't we? In essence, when the son comes to the father, he says, I want my inheritance now. Essentially, what he is saying to his dad is, you are dead to me. You are of no use to me other than the money that I'm about to get. So just hand me my money. Now, I am a dad of 2 children and a grandfather of 3. Woohoo! And on rare occasions, and I have to say this honestly, rare occasions over the years, they have asked me for money. They usually know it's a lost cause, so they don't do that. But when they would ask, it was generally with a sense of urgency. Dad, I want it now. I need it now. And then it would fall to me to use my best judgment as to whether there was a legitimate need or not, okay? So I understand this idea of a child coming to a dad and asking for money, and the fact, you need to understand that if that was me, I would be asking questions. Questions like, why do you need it? Another question would be, why don't you go earn your own money? And then, what's it for? Just questions like that. But in this case, in this story, what we find is the father just gives it to him with no questions asked. The father gives his son his share of the inheritance. What's missing here is the father does not say to his son, you know what, you're a spoiled brat, which I think some of us would be tempted to do. And neither does he say, do you understand what you're saying to me by asking for your inheritance now? You're telling me that I am dead to you, and all that really matters to you is the money that's coming your way. The father doesn't say that. In the story, it just indicates that he gave his son that inheritance. And what the father does in this parable, listen very carefully to how I'm going to say this, is he throws his arms around his son, not as he's leaving, but as he's coming home. In other words, this dad does nothing to stop his son from going off into the far country. That's what seems to be missing in our minds. He knows that this son is about to waste his money and waste a good part of his life, but he's not going to bring that into the conversation. So the father gives him his money. The son goes off into the far country and lives recklessly, and it doesn't tell us for how long, except that he does this until the money runs out. Okay? Now, what we kind of come to understand is that while he's living this reckless life, he is making a lot of friends because he's paying for the party. He's the one who's funding all this, so he throws these big parties. He has an entourage around him. We understand that concept. We talked about that a week or so ago, about an entourage who would just kind of go with you and follow you. And they're very willingly helping him to spend his dad's money. Okay? They didn't even ask where it came from. They just know he has the money. And once the money is gone, the story tells us, everybody leaves. Everybody. And so this young man now finds himself desperate. He has no money. He has no way to take care of himself. He has really no place to stay. So he ends up in a pigsty. He's feeding pigs for money. And the only thing that he could eat was the food that he fed to the pigs. Exciting? Makes you want to sign up for that for your next vacation, right? Hey, let's go work in a pigsty. All right. The Bible says when he finally came to his senses, he recognized that there had to be a better way to live than this. So it says to himself, I'm pretty sure my father is not going to welcome me back as a slave. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. He's not going to welcome me back as his son, but maybe he will welcome me back as a slave. So he picks himself up out of the pigsty. He makes his way home. And this is probably the part of the story that every one of you already knows. The father sees him coming from a long way off, runs to meet him, and then wraps his arms around him, hugs him, and welcomes him home. He puts a ring on his finger, and then he calls for the fattened calf to be killed and served. They were going to throw one monster party because this young man had come home. Now, all this is good news, okay? And all of this is happening because the father gets his son back. The son is home. Now they're going to have this big party. But there's one person in the story who is furious about the way things are going. And we're told that that is the older brother, okay? He complains somewhat violently to his dad that his younger brother, this younger son of his father, who wasted his dad's money, who treated his dad as if he doesn't exist, who recklessly lived in the far country. You see how he just keeps adding more to this description? You know, your son really did you in. He really, and by the way, if you look in this story, he keeps talking about your son, your son, your son. From this point on, never once will he refer to him as my brother. It's your son, your son, your son. And religion, like this older brother, is all about earning and deserving and good behavior and scorekeeping and ladder climbing. And this older brother in the story is really an example or the epitome of what religion is like. And I want you to understand, I'm drawing a comparison for us today between what religion is and what following Jesus Christ is. Because I maintain that there is a huge difference between those two things. Christianity is emphatically not religious. In fact, Christianity contradicts religion. Christianity, like the father in the story, is all about grace. And grace defies religious logic. Stay with me here. Grace has nothing to do with, as I said a moment ago, with earning or merit or deservedness. In fact, it is love coming to you that has nothing to do with you. It's love that's coming to you that has everything to do with the person who's doing the loving. Everything. So grace, in the eyes of the world, is really irrational. It's irrational in the sense that it does not operate according to our conditional standards. Do you have conditional standards? Are you always on? Do you always get it right? Do you always do the right thing? Do you always expect the right thing out of people? So you don't have any conditional standards, right? Yeah, right. But I want you to understand that grace, as I said a moment ago, has nothing to do with scorekeeping. It has nothing to do with balancing the books. I like this. Grace is a liberating contradiction between what we deserve and what we get. Grace is a liberating contradiction between what we deserve and what we get. Let me give you a definition for grace. We're going to use this throughout our series. Grace is unconditional acceptance given to an undeserving person by an unobligated giver. Let's think back through that. Grace is unconditional acceptance. We're going to talk about that today, that unconditional acceptance. It's really hard for us to wrap our minds around the idea of unconditional love because, let's be honest, even though we say that we love our children all the same, you got one that's more your favorite than the other, right? I'm not going to ask you to answer that. I'm not going to do that. So grace is unconditional acceptance given to an undeserving person We have a tendency to only want to share love with those that we think deserve our love. And it says it comes from an unobligated giver. So it comes from somebody who really has nothing to gain from this. It comes from somebody who just wants to give it. I think that's probably one of the best definitions of grace that I've ever heard. So again, grace has nothing to do with trade-offs, okay? Such as, if I do so much for you, then you are obligated to do so much for me. Never get caught in one of those things, do we? Or if I love you well, then I deserve love back from you. If I give you what you want, then you should give me what I want. Listen, that is not grace. Not grace at all. Grace has been called one-way love. It's one way coming from the person. And this is what the older brother cannot wrap his head around. It just, everything within him just wants to scream. And for so long, this older brother, like a lot of religious people that I have come across, have operated under the idea, here's the way that most of our world looks at this, that good people will get good stuff and bad people will get bad stuff. That's the way we look at things in our world. Good people will get good stuff, bad people will get bad stuff. So, let's get back to this older brother. For his rule-breaking younger brother to be given a party that it just doesn't seem fair, this just enrages this older brother because his heart is all about keeping rules. But that's what grace does. Grace offends our deepest sense of justice and rightness. Grace says, I'm going to play on what we talked about a moment ago, the bad get the best, the worst inherit the wealth, and the slave becomes the son. Did you get that? The bad get the best. This is what grace is like. The bad get the best. That doesn't seem right to us, does it? The worst inherit the wealth. Again, does not make sense to us. And then the slave becomes the son. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us either. The Apostle Paul talked about this. He said that while we were at our worst, God gave us his best. In Romans chapter 5, verse 8, it says it this way, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't die for us because we had passed the test. He didn't die for us because we did this or we did that or we brought this in or we accomplished that. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That is what I call the irrationality of grace. It doesn't make sense to our conditional way of thinking. This idea that the bad get the best and the worst inherit the wealth and the slave becomes the son, religion can't handle that. To which I would conclude religion is allergic to grace. Religion is allergic to grace. Now, I've used parts of this example before, but I want to share it again. Victor Hugo's amazing play, Les Miserables. Okay, like 3 of you in the room know what I'm talking about. His play has been called the greatest story ever told outside of the Bible in terms of grace. The story revolves around a character by the name of Jean Valjean, who escaped from prison where he was serving a sentence for stealing bread for his starving sister during a time of economic depression. So he meant well, but he gets caught and he gets put in jail. And this story follows his life for 19 years after escaping from prison. He's trying to rebuild his life. He comes up with disguises. He comes up with new names. He builds a rather successful life for himself a couple of times, and only to have to move on because somebody's getting close to him. But the enemy in this story is Inspector Javert. Enemy. Boo. Hiss. It's okay to do those things in here. Inspector Javert is a police officer. And we don't have either one of our police officers in here this morning, so I can go ahead and talk about them. We have 2 in this church now. But for 2 decades, Javert relentlessly and mercilessly hunts for Jean Valjean. Now, one of the most powerful scenes in the movie is right before Inspector Javert throws himself into the River Thames to die. He basically ends the show taking his own life. Why? Because he just can't handle the idea of grace. Stay with me here. Like the older brother in our parable, Javert typifies religion and its natural dislike of grace. Javert is committed to the demanding inflexibility of the law, even though, as we find out in this story, Jean Valjean has given Javert grace over and over and over again. Now, in the story, on so many times, so many occasions, he gets close to catching Jean Valjean. But Jean Valjean is always one step ahead of him. On every single one of those occasions, Jean Valjean has the opportunity to take Javert's life, to kill him. But he doesn't do it. Instead, he gives him grace every single time. He sets him free. He lets him go. And that, you would think Javert would be thrilled with that. He is infuriated by that. Going so far as to really, he doesn't understand why Jean Valjean is doing what he's doing. Javert cannot get past the fact that Jean Valjean is a lawbreaker. And lawbreakers should what? Pay for it, right? And we can be this way at times. We can see people and we know that we would never treat them better than they've been treated. But in his mind, he only sees one thing. The guilty deserve to be punished. Only justice will satisfy. He could almost put that on a t-shirt and wear that because that was kind of like his theme. And every time that Jean Valjean would show Javert grace, it would just fuel Javert's pursuit of him. It enraged him. The grace of Jean Valjean haunts and radically disorients Javert. Now, Javert reveals, and this really comes through in the end of the movie, that he really would rather die than deal with this man's disorienting grace. He just can't take it. I've been in the church all my life, and unfortunately, I've known church people just like this. They would rather die, figuratively speaking, than deal with the reality of grace, rather than give grace to someone that they just have decided in their minds could never deserve it. So this idea that the bad get the best, and the worst inherit the wealth, and the slave becomes the son, it goes against every religious impulse that we all have. Let's be honest with that. Why, though? It's because the rest of the world is persistently shouting to us that good people get good stuff and bad people should get bad stuff. And we are constantly, are we not, in our culture, in our world, aren't we inspired by rewards? Aren't we inspired to get ahead, to get all those things? If we do the right things, that's what's going to come to us. We don't think about the opposite of that. My point is, we live in a conditional world. We are conditional people. And we live with other conditional people. Okay, just turn to the person next to you and tell them, you are a conditional person. Just go ahead. Tell them right now, you are a conditional person. There's too many heads nodding after that got said. Grace is so radically unconditional that it messes us up. And as I think about the church in general, the church, which is supposed to be the shining example of grace in this world, the church is supposed to be the safe place this dark world needs. The church oftentimes ends up sounding a little bit more like the older brother in the story, more like Javert than Jean Valjean. Just like the older brother, he can't get out of his head the fact that this younger brother has done everything wrong. And he has done everything right. And when this brother who has done everything wrong comes home, the father welcomes him back, throws him a party. Does that make sense to you? In the world in which we live, in the way that we've been raised, the way that we understand things, no, that does not make sense to the older brother. And as a result, when it comes time for the party and his dad comes around to ask him why he didn't come, this brother is furious. The father in the story of the prodigal son just appears to not really grasp it. He doesn't understand the older son's attitude. And he basically asks him, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you happy? Why aren't you inside celebrating with us? Your brother's home. Come on in. Just come on in and enjoy this. But in Luke chapter 15, verse 32, this is what the father says. He says, but we had to celebrate and be glad. This is the father's response. Because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. That's given to us as the heartbeat or the example of what the younger brother gets when he comes home, regardless of what he did in the far country. Now, I need to stop here for just a moment and point out something else. When the son comes home, there was a very warm welcome, but there are no questions asked about what he did. So it's not like the father said, I will only welcome you back into my home when I can be certain that you are genuinely repentant for whatever you did in that far country. He could have said, I want a detailed account of everything you did. I want to hear in your voice and see in your eyes that you know you've done wrong. I want a sincere apology. Then and only then will I welcome you back home. Do we find this in the story? No, it's not there at all. He doesn't do that. The father just welcomes him back and throws him a party with no strings attached. So at this point we're going, okay, how does that apply to us? Well, I think this picture this parable is one of the best pictures in the Bible for how God works on rebellious people, of which I am one, and I'm sorry to say you are too. The son asks for his money, and the dad gives it to him. He goes off and blows it. I'm sure he learned a couple of lessons along the way. Don't know for sure, but I'm fairly certain that he did. In the process, he loses his friends. He loses his money. He experiences the consequences of sin. He wakes up in a pigsty one day, and he says to himself, I'm going home. And what's interesting is that the Bible doesn't say that when he came to himself and says, I'm going to go home, the Bible never says that he was sorry for what he did. He's basically saying, I am not going back because I want to apologize to my dad because I feel terrible about what I said and what I did. I'm going back, quite honestly, because my situation sucked. And I want a better situation. So, any idea that the father welcomed him back because he was genuinely repentant, that idea just goes out the window. By the way, that's how I was taught the story when I was young, is that the reason that the father welcomed him back was because at some point, and we don't have it in the Bible, but it says that he apologized. He never does. He never does. I think he's coming home very selfishly, and he's saying, I want to improve my situation. If improving my situation means I go back and I'm something of a burden on my family, as if I haven't been already, then I'll do it. But I'm doing it for me. And of course, the father welcomes him back and throws him a party, and there's no questions asked. My favorite part in the prodigal son is when the father sees the son from a distance. He knows that at some level, even if it hasn't reached the deepest level in his son yet, he realizes at some level God has been at work in his life. The very fact that he's coming home means that in some way, shape, or form, God has been working on him. The father trusts then that God is the one who's going to deal with his son rather than what the father could do. The father could literally have dragged his son off to the city tribunal, which were the elders that sat at the gates of the city, and put him on trial. And he could do everything that they told him to do, and then he wouldn't get to come back home. In fact, most likely he would have been stoned to death for what he did. Now, as a parent, you know how these kinds of stories go. It's very hard to give grace to people who have done wrong and don't want to admit it. Come on, be honest. Even with your own children, it's very hard. You want to get them to the point where they apologize, right? I'm sorry. I did what was wrong. I shouldn't do this, and on and on and on. But it just doesn't always happen that way. We can come up with 1,000 qualifications for why we should not do the things that we shouldn't do. And yet here is one more story in the Bible showing that that's exactly what God does with all of us. He accepts us without forcing us to apologize. All of us. And this is the part of grace that people just can't wrap their minds around. And this is the part of grace why I'm going to preach on this for 6 weeks. Because we don't get it either. This idea that there is an unconditional love. Unconditional means what? Unconditional what? No conditions, no strings. There's no strings. The idea that there is an unconditional love that relieves the pressure, that forgives our failures, and replaces our fear with faith, it just seems too good to be true. But it is true. God loves us regardless of what we may or may not bring to the table. I hope we understand that, because it's going to make the idea that God has saved us that much more exciting. God loves us regardless of what we may or may not do. There's no strings attached to his love. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. There are no qualifiers. There are no conditions. There is no need for balance. Every time that I preach on the subject of grace, I end up having a conversation with somebody along the way who says, aren't you overdoing it a bit on the grace stuff? I mean, come on. Doesn't there have to be a recompense? Doesn't there have to be a trade-off here? And I'm trying to say no. There doesn't have to be. From our perspective, if you want to think about it this way, grace is the most dangerous, expectation-wrecking, smile-creating, freedom-generating power that there is. Grace is an undeserved gift, pure and simple. Now you think, well, okay, it's really that good, so I'm going to pay God back. Don't worry. Your balance has already been paid. And our money is no good to God anyway. Our currency doesn't count in God's economy. Okay? Now, here's the way I want you to look at this. Religion says, I messed up. My dad is going to kill me. Grace says, I messed up. I need to run home and tell my dad. What a different attitude. But that's the difference. People will run from law, and they will run from grace. But those who run from the law rarely ever come back. And those who run from grace come back almost every time. There's proof of that in this story. The father did not read him the riot act. Did your parents ever read you the riot act at one point or another? My mom is watching this sermon this morning, so I just kind of, you're all my protection, okay? But was I the only one? Only one? Okay, all right. Some of you are finally confessing. Yeah, finally confessing. But the dad didn't do that to him. He didn't do it to him when he was leaving. And he didn't do it to him when he came back. He just let him go. When we trust God with not just the people in our lives, but with ourselves, and sometimes with people that we love, sometimes we have to let go. Do you understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do to somebody is to let them go? Why would I say that? Because I believe that God is doing something in them that we can't see. We don't know how God is working something in their lives, and sometimes we do everything within our power to keep them from going. Don't go, come back, we'll make it all right. We make every attempt on our part to keep them from going, but generally when that happens, all it does is push them further away. And then we have to let them go. I think letting them go is an act of grace. Trusting by faith that God can do more in their lives than you and I ever could. And then whatever they experience in the far country, all the things that we did not want them to experience because we were afraid they would come back with scars and wounds and things that they will now remember the rest of their lives. This is going to haunt them forever. That's all, I'm trying to say, that's all God's business. That's all God's business. And they go off and they experience these things. They experience the desires of their heart, and they go through the consequences of their foolish decisions, and then they come home. Maybe only for purely selfish reasons. I just want a roof over my head. I'm just tired of eating pig food. And the father just, what does he do? Welcomes him back. Not only is this such a good lesson for us in our relationships, but it is a perfect picture of the way God deals with us. Now, whichever one you are, whether you are the rule-breaking younger brother or the rule-keeping older brother, we tend to all be that way every day of our lives. It's not just one or the other. We tend to play both sides. We are both. We are great attorneys when it comes to our own sin. And we are great judges when it comes to everybody else's sin. When I need grace, I am all younger brother. When I am frustrated because grace has been given to someone who I think doesn't deserve it, I am all older brother. I am all for getting grace when I mess up. Remember that, okay? Just want you to know that. But if someone hurts me, then I'm not so much in favor of that person getting grace or the rule-keeping older brother or sister. The father, what's basically happened here is the father is saying, I'll keep the lights on and I'll keep the door open. And that's what grace does. It keeps the lights on and it keeps the door open. He invites us in with no questions asked. I think sometimes we live in fear that we're going to get to that final judgment day and God's going to have this screen full of all the terrible things that we did in our lives. That there's going to be this book that has all of this stuff written down. I know where you got those pictures from, but that is not who God is. That is not how God treats us. It is his delight to shower us with unconditional love. He wants us to have his amazing grace and his outrageous mercy. And he's giving this out to the least deserving of the least deserving, which in my book is me. Because as he does that, not only are our hearts warmed, but he gets the glory for every good thing that happens here. Now, interestingly, we tend to automatically in this story locate the Jesus figure in the story. You ever stop and think about who is Jesus in this story or who is God in this particular story of the prodigal son? We tend to automatically locate the Jesus figure in the story with the Father. And I think that's understandable. I think it's appropriate. But let's not forget that the real Jesus figure in this story is the killed fattened calf who died, who was put to death so that we might eat, whose blood was shed so that we might be cleansed. Ultimately, this is a story about you and me as runners and about Jesus as the one who comes after us and dies for us. Not because we deserve it and not because we've earned enough gold stars to be worthy of it. But it's happening because it is his delight, again, to shower that unconditional love on us. And because as he does that, our lives are changed because of it. Here at the Crosswalk, we want to be a church for those who have failed to find God's forgiveness, because God's forgiveness has found you. That's the kind of church we want to be. And I'm sorry to say that there really aren't a whole lot of churches like that. I wish every church was like that. Are we perfect? No. But we want to be that kind of a church. We want to be a church who sticks with people as they stumble through the difficulties of life the way God stuck with them. We want the Crosswalk to share outrageous grace, the kind of grace that refuses to give up on those who are trapped by sin and its struggles. Why? Because that's the way God has been with us. God refuses to give up on us. When this kind of stuff that we're talking about becomes alive in a community of people, it becomes very, very attractive to people who honestly admit they have struggles in their life. They want to be a part of something like this. This is a description we used when we first started the church. The crosswalk is a triage for